Welcome to Frameline 45. My name is Peter Stein. I'm senior programmer for the festival, and I'm so glad that you have joined us for our conversation with the director of Truman and Tennessee, an intimate conversation, and that is Lisa Imordino Vreeland, who I will welcome onto the screen here. We have caught up with her in the beautiful city of Venice, Italy, and welcome, Lisa. I think I even see one of the canals and a bridge behind your shoulder.
I think you're right. Well, listen, thank you so much for having the film at the festival. And I am in Venice, Italy, and feel very, very fortunate. It is the Biennale of Architecture, and so I am here. And it may be a little loud, so I apologize. But it's fun to be here speaking about Truman in Tennessee.
I'm thrilled that you are. Thanks for making the time to join us and to tell us a little bit, our Frameline audiences all across the country, about your fantastic film. And it's interesting that we found you in Venice at the Biennale of Architecture because, in fact, many of your previous biographical films have been about the art world, the fashion world. Your wonderful films about Diana Vreeland and Peggy Guggenheim and Cecil Beaton. And now you dive into these towering literary figures. So I'm just curious, what was the spark that had you dive into the worlds and lives of Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams?
Well, I think I really like to redefine these incredible visionaries for a younger audience. And I think what's been so special about Truman in Tennessee was that I was able to use their own words to tell the story. And that's what really, really touched me. And in the case of Diana Vreeland and Peggy and Cecil Beaton, I had this really beautiful visual material. But in here, what we ended up doing was we used the words to create a rhythm in the film. And it was, it's such an important story to tell, and to be able to tell this unique friendship between these two writers who had so much in common it was just really, for us, it was this opportunity to really redefine them and to show not only their similarities, but the struggles that artists have.
That comes through so beautifully in terms of the way you chart their similarities, their parallels. They're really extraordinary parallels as well as their differences. But structuring it as a conversation in a way between two people who, while they were friends and frenemies or rivals, they didn't actually have this deep trove of correspondence between them. So that is a really interesting structure, this kind of ping pong match that you set up. What was the inspiration for structuring the film as this kind of tete-a-tete?
That's a good question, and I think there were several things from the very beginning. Since I knew that I wanted to use the words to be able to tell the story and to really create this narrative, there was, first of all, the wealth of material, and being able, you probably are familiar with the fact that I love archives. I really dive into them. And so I not only read biographies, but then I really go into whatever is within the archive, letters that have been written to friends or anything else that may exist. And I was struck by, there's an artist by the name of Miguel Covarrubias, who was in the circle of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, who had the impossible interviews that he was writing for Vanity Fair in the 30s. And I loved this idea of these kind of conversations that didn't exist, but we kind of created them. And since Truman and Tennessee had this friendship, I had this vision of having the audience almost eavesdropping on a tete-a-tete between the two of them. And because we had these words, and because we had Jim Parsons and Zach Quinto do the VO, we could really create this atmosphere. And a film that I was very, very influenced by also in all of this was I Am Not Your Negro, which is just a brilliant, brilliant film. And so that, when I had seen that when it first came out, that really just, struck me. And, I knew visually what I wanted to do, but it was, if we didn't have the words, it would have been impossible to really create it that way. But, we also had the fortune of having that amazing, the most brilliant David Frost interview with the two of them.
Right. Again, which almost seems the designed to be placed side by side, since they were wonderfully parallel. You talk about the casting and the voiceover, and the actors are wonderful in sort
Yeah.
of not simply channeling or impersonating the voices, but really capturing something of the character underneath them. But one of the challenges that you faced, I guess, or choices that you faced, which maybe Raoul Peck in I'm Not Your Negro chose something a little bit different, is that you did cast actors who were trying to capture something of the sound of both Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams. But meanwhile, you had archival audio of them where you actually heard their actual voices.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate that tricky side by side piece?
Well, I realize now that I've thinking about my past films, I've done that already several times, because in Vreeland we had a professional actress play Deanna Vreeland's voice side by side, and I know that as a concept, everybody says, "Oh, it doesn't work out." It seems to be working out because I continue to do it, and we did the same thing with Mercedes Ruehl in Peggy Guggenheim, with Rupert Everett in Love Cecil, and now here. In the case of with both Jim and with Zach, there was a real intention. First of all, I was very fortunate because they were the dream team who I wanted to cast, but it doesn't always happen. And this unfortunate fact that COVID has taken place, it actually did give them some freedom in their schedule. But it was a very, first of all, both Truman and Tennessee did not shy away from the fact that they were homosexual. Okay, and they embraced it. I mean, were they completely public about it? They were as public as they could be about it. Because they did not shy away from it, and both Jim and Zach have not done that. And it was really important to not only capture them for that aspect, but for also capture it to have them cast because they're so passionate about both writers. Zach has played Tennessee Williams plays on Broadway. He is a huge fan. He's incredibly knowledgeable, and Jim has also been incredibly passionate about both of them. And I think it gave them a chance to do something slightly different. And I didn't really want them to play the exact voices. I wanted them to kind of embrace it and feel it in their own way. And it's a really nice relationship working with actors. And you both kind of instinctually know when you have it, when you have a certain line. And I think in the case with Truman Capote, Philip Seymour Hoffman was so brilliant in that role that we didn't. I knew that what Jim was going to do was really going to be just right. And he and Zach also discussed it. But for me, it was much more about an emotional beat. It wasn't a similarity in the cadence of the accents. And I think that they really did that. They both did that so well.
Completely agree. Beautiful performances in voiceover. You mentioned that both Truman and Tennessee were pretty much as out as they could be given the culture that they were in. And we sort of take for granted now that actors like Zach Quinto and Jim Parsons can be out and proud and open and gay and have careers. And it was so unusual to have publicly gay figures like Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams in their time. Since you took such a deep dive into their lives, do you think there was either a professional or a psychological price that either of these writers paid for being pretty much as out as they were?
I think that it's a very, very good question. I think personally there definitely was, because let's not forget that Truman's mother, who had abandoned him in a room many times as a young child, you're very damaged at that point anyway. But she suggested he goes to a doctor when because at a young age he knew that he was gay, and so she just felt that if he went to a doctor, the doctor would fix it. And in the case with Tennessee, who really did not feel that his father was ever accepting of him, he never had the support that he needed from either one of his parents, because he felt his mother was just never paid her focus was not really about the love of the children. So I think they both did suffer for that reason, but not in a professional way. Not in a professional. I think that Tennessee certainly suffered because he showed so much of his own self in his work, and I think Truman suffered because he just really, was just kind of jeopardizing and boycotting himself left and right. He was really just causing trouble for himself constantly. And that was really after he became successful.
You took such a extraordinary care and obviously a huge amount of research to dig into the archive to find these snippets of audio and oral histories and obviously the wonderful television interviews. I'm curious if there were records or letters or materials that you thought might exist that you looked for but that you couldn't find, or any surprises for you or frustrations in your archival hunt.
No, I think archives for me, I get such happiness out of it because I'm just, I love to do the research side. And there are always some surprises, and there's some, and when we started the conversation, you were talking about how we kind of created a story through these overlaps of things, and what we essentially did was that when we gathered all the material about when we used the David Frost interview as a launching pad, and from there we felt we had the freedom, which was so nice in a film, because since it wasn't a biopic, we could really talk about anything because we didn't have to be chronological. But in the fact that when we talked about their writing, we could talk about it in a general way, and what it did to them, the passion that they had, the drive that they had as young children, but then also how it destroyed them in so many ways. And there were certainly some surprises. I mean, a surprise for me, I never knew about Tennessee Williams' sister, and just the fact how shocking it was. 65 electroshock therapies. I didn't find that in an archive. I found that in just his simple biography. I did find out that they both went to Dr. Feelgood, which I thought was a great story. And Dr. Feelgood, I think somebody should do a film on him at some point if there's any material out there. But there were
completely fascinating parallel that helps set up for you as a storyteller. I think the kind of their harder, later chapters, which are kind of tough to watch. But here you have this parallel. It's not just only about alcoholism or substance abuse. It's this particular figure.
No, and the fact is that we didn't want to shy away from addiction, and when you have two people who they were children of alcoholics, and we didn't want to shy away from the fact that they were addicts. And Tennessee was not only an alcoholic, but he was also a sex addict. And we had to deal with those issues because that's a conversation of today. And so we did it. For me, it's really about warts and all. And the fact is that it was so, creating the storyline was so freeing because, first of all, the world was much smaller then, and their circle since they both also spent so much time in Europe, they would be in Venice, for instance, is a perfect example. They would be seeing Peggy Guggenheim, okay, because they were mutual friends. And, they would go to Tangier in Morocco. And even though they were going at separate times, they would definitely be seeing Paul and Jane Bowles because they were friends. So the world was just so much smaller. And that's what was so nice, to be able to create these stories. And you could find letters of, I have these beautiful pictures that I think Paul Bowles must have done of them individually on different trips when they were in Tangier. And it was it's so interesting to be able to go through an archive and discover these little things and use them if you can, and sometimes not use them. But the one thing that was given to me toward the very end of the film, which was very important, was a letter. And Thomas Keith is a Tennessee Williams expert, and thank God I ran into him at the very end. He had a letter that Tennessee had written to Truman in 1978, and this was after Unspoiled Monsters had come out, and he had kind of gotten over the anger and frustration with Truman, and he was just telling him that he needed to take care of himself, and it was just so positive and supportive of Truman. And something that probably, because that's how Tennessee was. That's what it seemed to me. I mean, I fell so in love with Tennessee because he had such a big heart through kind of all that damage. And so it was, I don't know, it's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, but I think the kind of tender, I don't know what to call it, the sort of gentle teddy bear quality of Tennessee really comes through in his in his words, which you
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily know if you just looked at the plays and the films. And did want to ask you about the film clips. Of course, film adaptations are notorious for being unfaithful to the original voice
Yeah.
of the playwrights or novelists who created the underlying work. So I'm curious if you debated whether the clips from the films were an accurate representation of the voice, or did these writers actually really love and work on the films that were adapted from their work?
In a lot of cases, first of all, the film clips were used in an interesting way because we really use them as a way to display the story that we were telling. And so we felt that what we used was kind of gave a little flavor of what the play was about, okay? And although the endings, and of course, as Tennessee appropriately said, that he always left 10 minutes before the end of a film because he didn't, he knew that the ending would be different. But we really picked very carefully, and we also, that's how I got to know personally Tennessee Williams, was through the movies and not through the plays originally. And so we were careful that we weren't picking something that was too controversial, but we wanted to show the authentic aspect of the story. And I think that our clips were just kind of short enough to give the point of the flavor of the film. And and in the case with Truman Capote, In Cold Blood was really brilliantly done, and he was so personally involved in it. And we know the story of Breakfast at Tiffany's because since it was not cast as appropriately as he had wanted it. And it would have been quite a different movie if Marilyn Monroe was cast
Yeah.
as it would have been.
And thank you for the film clips of the Tennessee Williams plays films, because without that, your film wouldn't have so much shirtless Marlon Brando, which really is kind of a treat.
I
um,
agree. Okay, I chose that very carefully.
One last question from me, which is really about the nature of the kind of posthumous biographies that you have excelled in so much. You have a wonderful quote from Truman Capote where he says that he didn't really care what people wrote about him as long as it wasn't true. And yet here you are telling us that you are really you need to do warts and all, and you're showing these characters in a light when they obviously can't respond or bat it down or deflect. So I'm curious what burden or responsibility you feel when you're telling people stories who aren't around anymore, how you feel you're getting at something that is truthful about these figures.
I think there's one word that always resonates with me, and it's just the word authentic. And I think I've been given the chance to do it, to tell a person's story, and I want to be authentic to them. But yet, we are also in a world right now that, I want to be able to tell something. I want to show somebody like you, who's very familiar with a lot of these characters. I want to show you something new and different. But then I want to have somebody from a younger generation. I want to be able to tell them and, give them not only a flavor of who this person is, but what their influence is, because I think that we're just forgetting too many things too quickly. And I do feel responsible, but I don't have like a pedantic responsibility type of feeling. I feel like because we do make films to entertain people. I mean, that is, even though it's a documentary, I mean, I think there are a lot of things that can be ticked off in the box. I would like it to be cinematic. I want it visually, I mean, visually, all the pictures have to be beautiful. They have to have kind of a veneer and a patina to them. And then I really want the real words of these characters to come alive. And, in the case with Truman and Tennessee, I really wanted their words to come alive. And I wanted to show, because so many people, especially in the case of Truman Capote, his legacy is a very sad one because, especially after Answer Prayers, he lost all of his friends. He was very much of an alcoholic. And if people only see pictures of him stumbling downstairs, being a 54, and that's not what we should be. I mean, these are two of the greatest writers of American writers of the 20th century. We need to remember what they actually accomplished. And if I am given the choice to be able to tell that story with their words, I am so happy. And I feel really lucky. And I feel it's something that I'm learning from the experience, and I'm hoping that everybody else has a takeaway. Because I mean, I'm always kind of in the process of learning new things. And it was a really special movie to make because from the beginning, I didn't want there to be any talking heads in the film. And so I knew that it had to be structured a certain way, and that, you know, also the visual material had to look a certain way. So it was kind of more adventurous as well for me. And I loved it. I mean, and kind of got me scared sometimes, but
Well, I think you set a bit of a new standard, or a new rung on the ladder for what it means to have a biographical film that does not use expert interviews, does not use talking heads, really is only the voices of the subjects. Of course, you had the benefit of wonderful interviewers like Dick Cavett
yes,
and David
please.
Frost. But the visual creativity, the way you brought to life the letters and their words, is really a remarkable craft achievement of your own. Even, no matter how good the subjects are you were working with, this is still a really wonderfully created documentary, and I'm thrilled that it's getting a theatrical release, which is happening just right after Frameline concludes in mid and late June. So Lisa, thank you. We're thrilled to have your film with Frameline. We're jealous that you're in Venice, but really happy to have your film in San Francisco and across the country.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm really thrilled. I hope everybody enjoys it. Okay. Thanks again.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye.
Ciao.